It was a bright and sunny afternoon, the kind of day that made people want to go outside, breathe the fresh air, and forget about the worries that life often brought. In a quiet part of the city, a young woman named Clara wheeled herself along the sidewalk, her hands skillfully moving the wheels of her chair as she navigated around a few scattered pedestrians. Clara was in her early 20s, with a smile that seemed to light up her face even when she faced challenges that many people could hardly imagine. She had been in a wheelchair for a few years after a car accident had left her with a spinal injury. Life had changed dramatically for her, but Clara had learned to adapt with courage and independence. Every day, Clara had a routine she followed carefully. Mornings were usually spent inside her small apartment, making sure she took care of herself, doing stretches and occasionally video calling her friends who lived across the country. She enjoyed these calls, because even though she loved her independence, she sometimes felt the walls of her apartment closing in. The afternoons, however, were reserved for her favorite part of the day, the park. It wasn't a huge park, but it had wide paths, plenty of benches, and trees that swayed gently in the wind. For Clara, the park was freedom. It was a place where she could feel the sun on her face, hear birds chirping, and see the world moving around her without feeling trapped. That afternoon, Clara had decided to take a longer route through the park. She loved the feeling of the wind brushing against her hair as she moved along the paths. Children were playing nearby, their laughter echoing across the open space, and elderly people were sitting on benches enjoying the warmth of the sun. Clara waved at a few familiar faces and they smiled back warmly. It was a normal, peaceful day, or so it seemed. Meanwhile, in a nearby street, Officer Daniels was driving slowly through the neighborhood. He was in his mid-30s with a reputation among some locals for being strict and easily annoyed. Today he seemed unusually tense, his eyes scanning every corner as if looking for someone breaking the law. The day had been quiet so far, and he felt a mix of boredom and restlessness. His uniform was crisp, his badge shining in the sunlight, and he adjusted his cap nervously as he continued down the street. There was something about the calm that bothered him, as if the lack of trouble meant he wasn't fulfilling his duty. As Clara wheeled deeper into the park, she noticed a few people glancing in her direction. Some smiled politely, others looked slightly uncomfortable. She didn't mind the attention. It was part of being in a wheelchair in a busy place. She had learned to ignore the curious stares and focus on enjoying her day. Clara had always been independent, and she liked it that way. She didn't need anyone to help her, and she preferred to handle things on her own whenever possible. Suddenly, Clara noticed Officer Daniels approaching from the park's entrance. He was walking briskly, with an expression that suggested he had already decided something before speaking. Clara felt a small twinge of unease. She had encountered officers before, and while most had been polite, there were some who seemed to enjoy asserting authority without reason. She tried to prepare herself mentally, reminding herself to stay calm. "Excuse me, miss," Officer Daniels said, his voice firm. "Can I see some identification?" Clara looked at him, slightly surprised. I'm just enjoying the park," she replied gently. "Do I really need to show ID?" The officer didn't smile. "It's a public place, and I need to make sure you're not causing any trouble." Clara's heart began to race, though she kept her tone polite. "I'm not causing any trouble. I live nearby and I come here often. You can see I'm just sitting here enjoying the weather." Officer Daniels didn't seem satisfied. He stepped closer, leaning slightly as if trying to intimidate her. Clara instinctively moved her wheelchair back a little, but there wasn't much space. She felt vulnerable. Her hands gripped the wheels tightly, ready to move quickly if she had to. But she knew that in a confrontation like this, she had very little control. A few people nearby started to watch the interaction. Some whispered to each other, unsure whether to step in. Clara noticed their hesitation and felt a mixture of frustration and embarrassment. She didn't want attention. She just wanted to enjoy a peaceful afternoon. "I said I need to see your ID," Officer Daniels repeated, his tone sharp. "What's your name? Where do you live?" Clara took a deep breath. "My name is Clara. I live on the street just 2 blocks from here. I come to this park every day. I haven't done anything wrong." The officer frowned. "That doesn't matter. You need to cooperate. This is a public space, and I'm responsible for making sure everything is in order." Clara felt a surge of fear and helplessness. She couldn't stand up, couldn't walk away, and couldn't physically defend herself if the situation escalated. She tried to reason with him, keeping her voice calm. I understand you're doing your job, but I promise I'm not breaking any rules. Please, just let me enjoy the park like everyone else. Officer Daniels seemed unconcerned with her words. He took another step closer, and Clara's anxiety grew. People around them were now fully watching, sensing that something unfair was happening. Some shook their heads quietly, while others whispered, unsure if they should intervene. Clara felt small, isolated, and vulnerable, all in the middle of a sunny park where she should have felt safe. As the tension grew, a figure appeared at the edge of the park. It was John Cena, casually walking with a few assistants, likely there for a filming project nearby. He noticed the gathering crowd and the visible distress on Clara's face. He could immediately tell that something wasn't right. He slowed his pace and observed from a short distance. He wasn't just noticing a small disagreement. He was seeing a young woman in a wheelchair being confronted by an officer who seemed determined to assert authority unnecessarily. Clara didn't see him yet. She was focused entirely on Officer Daniels, whose presence felt overwhelming. She had faced challenges before, but this situation was different. It wasn't just physical. It was emotional. The officer wasn't listening, wasn't reasoning, and it seemed like he was more interested in showing power than understanding reality. A few bystanders began murmuring. Should we do something? One asked another. I don't know. Maybe he's just doing his job, the other replied. The uncertainty made the tension even heavier. Clara tried to take deep breaths, reminding herself that she had every right to be there. She kept repeating it in her mind. I belong here. I haven't done anything wrong. The officer's voice was sharp again. I said, show me your identification now. Clara's hands tightened on the wheelchair. She felt a mix of fear and determination. She didn't want to cause trouble, but she also didn't want to be treated unfairly. Her mind raced as she tried to think of a way to calm the situation. She opened her mouth to speak, but before she could say anything, she felt a large shadow fall across the path. It was John Cena. He stepped forward, his presence immediately noticeable. He didn't rush or shout. He simply stood there, calm but firm. His height, broad shoulders, and confident posture created an aura of authority that even Officer Daniels couldn't ignore. The officer stopped mid-step, suddenly aware that the situation had changed. Clara looked up and saw him. Relief washed over her like a wave. She didn't have to face this alone anymore. Her heart slowed slightly, and she felt a spark of hope. This wasn't about fame or spectacle. It was about someone noticing her struggle and choosing to step in. Cena's eyes met Officer Daniels, and he spoke clearly, his voice calm but unwavering. What's going on here? Officer Daniels blinked, caught off guard. He had no idea who he was dealing with. He shuffled slightly as if trying to regain control, but Cena's presence alone shifted the energy. Clara watched silently, grateful as someone finally confronted the unfairness she had been facing. For the first time that afternoon, the park felt like a place where she could breathe again. Clara realized that sometimes, even when you are strong and independent, having someone else stand with you can make all the difference. The day that had started like any other had turned into a moment that she would never forget, and it was only just beginning. The tension in the park grew with every passing second. Clara could feel her heartbeat racing as Officer Daniels hovered nearby, his shadow stretching over her wheelchair like an invisible cage. She tried to keep her composure, reminding herself she had done nothing wrong. She had every right to enjoy the park, the sun, and the gentle breeze. But the officer's presence made it feel like the world had shrunk, leaving her trapped in a corner with no escape. Officer Daniels didn't seem concerned with reason or fairness. He leaned slightly toward Clara, lowering his voice so that only she could hear. I don't like your attitude, he said sharply. You think you can just roll around here without following the rules? Clara swallowed hard. Her hands gripped the wheelchair wheels tightly, ready to move if needed, but she knew she couldn't outrun him. I'm not breaking any rules, she said softly but firmly. I'm just here to enjoy the park. Please let me be. The officer's frown deepened. He seemed to enjoy the power he thought he held over her. You need to show me your identification. Now. Clara took a deep breath. She had carried her ID with her, but the thought of handing it over under this intimidating pressure made her nervous. She wanted to comply, but she also wanted to make it clear that she had done nothing wrong. I will show you my ID, she said carefully. But I don't understand why this is necessary. I live nearby, I come here every day, and I'm not bothering anyone. Around them, a small crowd had begun to gather. Some people had stopped walking, curious about the commotion. Others were quietly filming on their phones, unsure whether this was just a minor misunderstanding or something more serious. Clara could feel their eyes on her, but instead of feeling comforted, she felt even more exposed. She wasn't asking for attention. She just wanted a normal afternoon. Officer Daniels ignored the crowd. He wasn't worried about witnesses or consequences. He seemed focused only on asserting authority. He stepped even closer, leaning toward Clara. I said now. Identification, he repeated, his voice now rising slightly. Clara felt a pang of fear. She had encountered difficult situations before, but never like this. She was alone in a wheelchair, and facing someone who seemed intent on making her feel powerless. Her heart pounded in her chest as she tried to reason with him again. Please, I haven't done anything wrong. I'm just trying to enjoy the park. You can check my ID, but there's no need to treat me like this. The officer's eyes narrowed. You think you can talk back to me? He snapped. I can take you in if I want to. Don't make me do that. Clara's stomach dropped. The thought of being taken somewhere she hadn't done anything wrong was terrifying. She felt trapped, not just physically in her wheelchair, but emotionally as well. Every instinct in her body screamed to escape, but there was no quick way out. She could only stay calm and hope that reason would eventually prevail. Meanwhile, the onlookers were growing restless. Some whispered to each other, debating whether to intervene. Should we call someone? One person asked quietly. Another shook their head. It's a cop. We don't know what he might do. Fear had made everyone hesitant. Clara realized how vulnerable she really was, and she felt a mix of frustration and sadness. She had always prided herself on being independent, but now she understood that sometimes independence isn't enough when someone else decides to intimidate you. Officer Daniels noticed the growing crowd and seemed to enjoy the attention. You all see this? He said, his voice loud enough for everyone to hear. This is what happens when people don't follow the rules. I'm just doing my job. Clara felt a wave of helplessness wash over her. The officer's words were designed to shame her, to make her feel small in front of strangers. She looked around at the faces watching silently and realized that no one had stepped forward. She was alone, facing someone who seemed to care more about showing power than doing what was right. Her mind raced, trying to find a way to diffuse the situation. She remembered the advice her friends had given her. Always stay calm, speak clearly, and never show fear. Taking a deep breath, she said, Officer, please. I promise I am not causing any trouble. I am just a person trying to enjoy a normal day in the park. There's no reason for this to continue. The officer didn't respond immediately. He seemed to be thinking, or perhaps he was just savoring the control he believed he had. He glanced at the growing crowd and then back at Clara. You're lucky I'm being patient, he said finally. But you need to understand that I can't just let people ignore me. Clara's hands trembled slightly as she tried to steady herself. The tension was almost unbearable. She had faced challenges in her life before. Rehabilitation, learning to navigate a world not built for people in wheelchairs, dealing with strangers' stares. But this was different. This was a person in a position of authority using his power to intimidate her for no reason. She realized in that moment how vulnerable people can feel when the system designed to protect them becomes a source of fear instead. Then, a shift happened. From a distance, Clara noticed a tall figure approaching. It was John Cena. She didn't recognize him immediately, but there was something about his presence that felt different. He moved with a calm confidence, but there was an unmistakable authority in the way he carried himself. He didn't rush, didn't shout, but something about him made Clara feel a glimmer of hope she hadn't felt in minutes. Cena stopped a few feet away from the confrontation, observing quietly. He could see the fear on Clara's face and the unnecessary aggression from Officer Daniels. He didn't need to be involved, but he knew that someone had to stand up. Clara's eyes met his briefly, and she felt a sense of relief. She wasn't alone anymore. Officer Daniels, however, didn't notice Cena at first. He was too focused on asserting dominance. I said, show me your ID, he repeated, his tone sharper than before. Clara took another deep breath, her hands gripping the wheels tightly. She felt tears threatening to spill, but she refused to let them. She had faced challenges before, and she wasn't going to let fear control her now. The crowd around them was holding its breath. No one had stepped forward yet, unsure of what would happen next. Clara realized how quickly a situation could escalate when someone in power refuses to listen. She knew that if things continued this way, she could be physically or emotionally harmed. Every instinct in her body screamed for someone to intervene. Cena finally spoke, his voice calm but firm. "What's going on here?" Officer Daniels looked up, startled. He hadn't expected anyone to confront him, let alone someone who seemed so confident and imposing. He straightened slightly, trying to maintain authority. "This girl needs to show me her identification," he said, pointing toward Clara. Cena's eyes were steady as he looked at the officer. "And why is that?" he asked. "She hasn't done anything wrong. Why are you harassing her?" Clara felt a wave of relief wash over her. Finally, someone was challenging the unfairness she had been facing. She could feel the tension in the air shift slightly, the power dynamic beginning to change. Officer Daniels blinked, caught off guard. He was no longer in control, and it showed. The crowd began to murmur again, but this time, their whispers carried a sense of hope rather than fear. Clara could feel her confidence slowly returning. She realized that sometimes even the strongest people need someone else to stand with them. It wasn't about fame or heroics, it was about fairness, justice, and human decency. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady her racing heart. She looked at Cena and whispered softly, "Thank you. I didn't know what to do." Cena nodded slightly, keeping his attention on the officer. "You don't have to face this alone," he said. "No one should be made to feel powerless for no reason." Officer Daniels shuffled slightly, his confidence shaken. He hadn't expected this. The situation that had seemed so simple to him, asserting authority over someone he deemed different, was now complicated by the presence of someone who would not tolerate injustice. For the first time that afternoon, he seemed unsure of what to do next. Clara felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. She had gone from feeling completely vulnerable to realizing that support could arrive when she least expected it. The park, which had felt like a trap just moments ago, now seemed a little less threatening. She could finally breathe again, at least a little, knowing that someone was standing up for what was right. The air in the park felt different now, heavier, charged with tension but tinged with a spark of hope. Clara sat in her wheelchair, her hands still gripping the wheels tightly, but the panic in her chest had eased slightly. The presence of John Cena was impossible to ignore. He didn't move aggressively or shout commands. He simply stood there, calm yet confident, observing the situation with sharp eyes that seemed to see everything at once. Even from a distance, Clara could feel his strength and calm energy as if it created a protective bubble around her. Officer Daniels, on the other hand, was clearly unsettled. He had been used to people complying without question, to situations where his word was enough to intimidate. But now this newcomer had stepped into the situation, not with force or aggression, but with a quiet authority that made Daniels pause. He straightened his uniform, trying to appear professional, but his voice wavered slightly as he addressed Cena. This girl needs to show identification," he stammered, pointing toward Clara as if that could justify his actions. Cena's eyes didn't leave Daniels. His voice was calm, measured, but carried a weight that made the officer feel small. "Why are you harassing her?" he asked. "What rule is she breaking?" "Look at her. She's in a wheelchair, enjoying the park like everyone else. There is no reason for this." The crowd, which had been watching silently until now, started to murmur. People leaned closer, sensing that something important was unfolding. Some whispered to each other, "Who is that guy? He seems serious." Others simply watched, their curiosity piqued and their empathy stirred by Clara's visible discomfort. Clara herself felt a rush of relief she hadn't expected. For the first time in what felt like hours, someone was speaking up on her behalf, someone who refused to let her vulnerability be exploited. Officer Daniels's frown deepened. He was not accustomed to being questioned, especially not by someone who radiated calm authority. I'm just doing my job," he muttered, his tone less confident now. "She needs to show ID, it's standard procedure." Cena took a small step closer, his posture relaxed but firm. He didn't shout, didn't raise his voice, but the sheer presence of him made the officer hesitate. "Standard procedure doesn't mean you can intimidate people," Cena said evenly. "She hasn't done anything wrong. You are harassing someone who is vulnerable and doing nothing to deserve it. Step back." Clara's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold. She had always believed in staying calm and composed, but even she could feel the tension crackling in the air. Daniel's eyes darted toward the growing crowd, then back to Cena. The officer was clearly realizing that the dynamic had shifted, and he didn't like it. He tried to regain his authority, but the confidence that Cena exuded made it nearly impossible. The bystanders were now more visible, some holding out their phones to film the event. Others whispered encouragement to Clara, though no one moved closer. The tension was no longer just between the officer and Clara. It had expanded to include the man standing protectively in front of her and the invisible eyes of those watching. It was a moment of confrontation that had no clear winner yet, and everyone could sense the weight of what was happening. Cena's gaze softened slightly as he looked at Clara. "You're okay," he said quietly, just loud enough for her to hear. "You don't have to face this alone." Clara's eyes filled with tears, not from fear anymore, but from the relief of finally having someone stand with her. She nodded slightly, unable to find the words, her hand still gripping the wheelchair. Officer Daniels, meanwhile, was growing more frustrated. He had never faced resistance like this. He had expected Clara to comply immediately, and he had expected the crowd to stay silent. Instead, he was confronted by someone who refused to allow injustice, someone whose calm authority made Daniel's aggressive tactics look weak and petty. He shifted uneasily, trying to think of a way to reassert control. "You don't understand," Daniel said, his voice rising slightly. "I have rules to follow. This is my responsibility." Cena didn't flinch. His voice remained steady, commanding respect without aggression. "Your responsibility is to protect people, not to make them feel powerless. She is not breaking any rules. If anything, you are in the wrong. Step back and let her be." The officer's jaw tightened. He looked around at the small crowd, realizing that the attention was now on him. People were recording, whispering, and watching. For the first time, he felt the weight of public scrutiny. This was no longer a private confrontation. It had become a visible, undeniable display of his misconduct. He shifted slightly as if reconsidering his next move. Clara took a shaky breath. "Please, officer," she said softly. "I'm not doing anything wrong. I don't want any trouble. I just want to enjoy the park. Can we please end this?" Cena nodded at her, his eyes still on Daniel's. "See, she's calm, reasonable, and polite. There is no reason for this to continue. Treat her with respect." The officer muttered something under his breath, clearly embarrassed now. He stepped back slightly, his aggressive posture softening, though he still tried to maintain some semblance of authority. The crowd noticed the change. Some murmured approval quietly, while others exhaled in relief, sensing that the confrontation was moving toward resolution. Clara felt a rush of gratitude and hope. She had been terrified moments ago, feeling completely vulnerable in her wheelchair with no way to escape. Now, with Cena standing nearby, the fear had been replaced with relief and courage. She realized that sometimes it isn't about physical strength alone. It's about having someone willing to speak up, someone who refuses to let injustice continue. Cena glanced briefly at the onlookers, then back at Daniels. "If you can't do your job without intimidating innocent people, then maybe it's time to reconsider how you handle your responsibilities," he said. His tone was firm but not harsh, and it carried a clarity that left little room for argument. The officer's face reddened. He shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable under the scrutiny. He muttered something else, less audible, and took another step back. The authority he had tried to project was crumbling in front of everyone, replaced by the undeniable presence of someone who demanded fairness. Clara felt a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt in a long time. Even though she couldn't physically defend herself, she realized that having someone stand with her could change the outcome entirely. The fear that had gripped her moments ago was slowly fading, replaced by hope and confidence. She smiled slightly at Cena, who gave a small nod in return, a silent reassurance that he had her back. The crowd began to relax, sensing that the tension had eased. Some people whispered to each other, commenting on how unusual it was to see someone intervene like that. Others simply watched in awe, recognizing that a young woman in a vulnerable position had been defended with dignity and calm authority. Clara's relief was palpable. She had been afraid, isolated, and powerless just minutes ago, but now she felt a renewed sense of security. Cena finally turned to Clara, giving her a reassuring smile. "You're okay now," he said softly. "It's over." Clara's eyes welled up with tears, not from fear but from the overwhelming relief and gratitude. She nodded, unable to find the words, and felt her heart slow from the adrenaline that had been coursing through her body. Officer Daniels lingered for a moment, clearly embarrassed and unsure how to respond. He muttered something inaudible and finally walked away, leaving Clara and Cena in peace. The tension that had dominated the park moments ago was gone, replaced by a calm that felt almost surreal. Clara exhaled deeply, her hands finally loosening their grip on the wheelchair wheels. She looked around at the crowd who were now whispering excitedly among themselves and then back at Cena. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what I would have done without you." Cena smiled kindly. "You're welcome. You shouldn't have had to go through that alone," he said. "Remember, it's okay to stand up for yourself and it's okay to accept help when you need it." Clara nodded, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. The park, which had felt threatening moments ago, now felt safe again. The sunlight felt warmer, the breeze gentler, and even the sounds of children playing seemed to carry a sense of reassurance. She realized that sometimes courage comes not just from within, but from those willing to stand with you when you need it most. As Cena walked away toward his filming location, Clara felt a newfound strength. The fear and vulnerability she had experienced were still there in her memory, but they were now paired with a sense of empowerment and hope. She knew that the world could be unfair and intimidating, but she also knew that there were people willing to do the right thing when it mattered most. The park slowly returned to normal. The children's laughter, the rustling of leaves, and the gentle hum of the city all returned to their places. But for Clara, nothing would ever be quite the same again. She had faced a frightening situation, been vulnerable in ways she hadn't expected, and had come through it not just unharmed but strengthened by the experience. The tension in the park didn't vanish immediately after Officer Daniels took a step back. For a few moments there was a quiet, heavy pause in the air. The sunlight shone on the scene, but Clara felt as if everything had slowed down. Her chest was still tight from fear, her hands still gripping the wheelchair wheels, though now with a mix of relief and lingering nervousness. She was aware of every sound, the distant barking of a dog, the rustling of leaves in the trees, and the quiet murmur of the small crowd that had gathered. John Cena remained close by, standing in a calm but assertive stance. He wasn't yelling or threatening. He simply positioned himself so that Clara felt protected. His presence alone seemed to hold the officer at bay, creating an invisible boundary that Daniels could not cross without being noticed. The officer, realizing that the crowd was watching and that he had already lost some control, tried to compose himself. He shifted his weight, cleared his throat, and muttered something about doing his job. But the words lacked conviction. The confident facade he had worn earlier was crumbling. Clara finally dared to look around. Some onlookers were whispering to each other, casting glances at the officer, at her, and at Cena. Others were taking out their phones, not in a threatening way, but simply to record the unusual scene. A sense of accountability was forming in the air. Clara felt it, and it gave her courage. She realized that injustice cannot hide when people are willing to watch, and that sometimes simply being visible makes a difference. Cena's voice cut through the quiet. "Officer," he said calmly but firmly, "there's no reason to intimidate someone who is not causing any trouble. She's allowed to be here. She hasn't done anything wrong. Step back and do your job properly." Daniels hesitated. He looked around at the small crowd, sensing the attention on him. He was aware that his actions were now being scrutinized, and that this wasn't just about enforcing rules anymore. It was about how he behaved as a person in a position of authority. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of accountability press down on him. For the first time that afternoon, he realized that his behavior was not just unfair, it was visible, undeniable, and unacceptable. Clara felt a mixture of emotions. Fear, yes, but also hope, relief, and even a little empowerment. The presence of someone willing to stand with her, to speak on her behalf, was a reminder that she was not alone. She thought about all the times she had felt vulnerable in the past, moments when the world seemed to be against her, and realized that courage sometimes comes from support, not just from within. "Clara," Cena said gently, "it's okay. You don't need to worry anymore. This will be resolved now. Clara nodded, trying to steady her voice. Thank you, she whispered. I didn't know what to do. I was so scared. Cena gave a reassuring smile. It's okay. You handled yourself well, but no one should have to face this alone. Officer Daniels, meanwhile, was shifting uncomfortably. He had taken a step back, but he was still standing there, trying to figure out how to regain control of the situation. His pride was wounded and his authority undermined. He muttered something about following procedure, but the words were weak, almost a whisper. Cena, sensing the moment, didn't let him regain ground. Procedure doesn't give you the right to intimidate people, Cena said. Your job is to protect, not to bully. She's not causing any trouble. Accept that and move on. Daniels's hands trembled slightly, his voice unsteady. He glanced at the growing crowd, realizing that he was now being watched and that any further aggressive action would not go unnoticed. The fear of consequences was finally reaching him. The very power he had tried to wield was slipping through his fingers. Clara, feeling the shift in energy, spoke up softly. Please, officer. Just let this go. I haven't done anything wrong. I just want to enjoy the park. Cena nodded at her, then looked back at Daniels. She's asking politely. That's all that's needed. You don't need to make this harder than it is. The officer took a deep breath and finally stepped back fully, a clear sign that the confrontation was coming to an end. He muttered under his breath and glanced away, clearly frustrated but powerless to continue the harassment. The small crowd around them started to relax slightly, sensing that the immediate danger had passed. Some whispered among themselves, commenting on how unusual it was to see someone intervene with such calm authority. Others simply watched silently, appreciating the courage of both Clara and Cena. Clara exhaled deeply, feeling as if a huge weight had been lifted from her shoulders. She had been terrified moments ago, completely vulnerable and unsure what would happen next. Now she felt a strange combination of relief, gratitude, and empowerment. Her hands, still resting on the wheelchair wheels, were trembling slightly, but not from fear, rather from the adrenaline finally subsiding. Cena crouched slightly to bring himself closer to Clara's eye level. You're safe now, he said softly. It's over. Remember this. It's okay to stand up for yourself, and it's okay to accept help when it's offered. You don't have to face everything alone. Clara nodded, tears threatening to spill. Thank you. So much, she said. I can't believe this happened. I felt so helpless. Cena placed a reassuring hand on her shoulder lightly, not in a way that was intimidating, but simply to show solidarity. You weren't helpless, he said gently. You were calm, you spoke up, and you didn't let fear take over. That's strength. But sometimes strength also means letting others help you. The officer lingered nearby, clearly embarrassed. He muttered something inaudible and finally turned to walk away, muttering about procedures and responsibilities, but without the authority he had tried to project earlier. The crowd began to disperse slowly, their attention moving to other parts of the park, but many were still glancing back, clearly affected by the confrontation they had just witnessed. Clara took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. Her body was exhausted from the stress, but her mind was clearer than it had been all afternoon. She realized that fear had a way of shrinking the world, making it feel smaller and more dangerous than it really was. But when someone stands with you, even just one person, the world feels bigger, safer, and more hopeful. Cena smiled at her one last time before walking toward the area where his team was waiting. Remember what I said, he said. You're not alone, and you're stronger than you think. Clara watched him leave, feeling a mix of gratitude and awe. The fear and vulnerability she had felt moments ago were still in her mind, but they were now paired with a sense of empowerment and hope. She realized that one small act of courage from someone else could completely change the outcome of a frightening situation. She also understood that standing up for herself, even in small ways, mattered too. The park slowly returned to its normal rhythm. Children's laughter, the distant hum of traffic, and the gentle rustling of leaves all returned to their places. Clara wheeled herself slowly along the path, feeling a newfound sense of confidence. She waved at a few of the bystanders who had been watching, receiving smiles and nods in return. For the first time that day, she felt a sense of peace in her surroundings. As she continued along the path, Clara reflected on what had happened. The encounter with Officer Daniels had been frightening and unfair, but it had also taught her something valuable. She had learned that vulnerability doesn't mean weakness. and that strength can come in many forms, including the courage to accept help. She realized that even in a world that sometimes seemed unfair or intimidating, there were people willing to do the right thing. Clara's mind wandered to her future, to the countless afternoons she would spend in the park, and to the knowledge that she was not alone in facing the challenges of life. She felt empowered knowing that courage, empathy, and human kindness could make a real difference, even in situations that seemed hopeless. By the time she reached her usual bench near the center of the park, Clara's heart had calmed, and the fear she had felt earlier was almost gone. She settled herself in the wheelchair, took a deep breath, and allowed herself to enjoy the sunshine once more. The world, though still imperfect, felt a little brighter, a little safer, and a little more hopeful. After the confrontation in the park, Clara felt a mix of emotions she had never experienced all at once. Relief, gratitude, and empowerment swirled through her as she wheeled herself slowly along the familiar paths she had traveled countless times before. The sunlight felt warmer on her face, the gentle breeze more refreshing, and the sounds of the park, the laughter of children, the rustling of leaves, the distant barking of dogs seemed to carry a sense of calm reassurance. The park had been her place of freedom and peace for years, and now, after the unexpected confrontation, it felt even more personal and meaningful. Clara couldn't stop thinking about what had just happened. Only a short while ago, she had felt completely vulnerable, trapped in her wheelchair with a police officer harassing her for no reason. Fear had gripped her tightly, making every moment feel heavier and more uncertain. But then John Cena had appeared, not to intimidate, not to yell, but simply to stand with her, to speak up when no one else would. That simple act of kindness and courage had changed everything. She realized how much power a single person could have when they chose to do the right thing. As Clara settled onto her favorite bench near the center of the park, she reflected on the small crowd that had gathered during the incident. Many of the onlookers had been hesitant at first, unsure whether to intervene or speak up. Some had filmed the event on their phones, likely to share later as a reminder of what had happened. But through it all, one thing was clear. When someone sees injustice and chooses to act, it has a ripple effect. Clara had felt that ripple, and it had reached her in the most profound way. She remembered the moment when Cena had crouched slightly to meet her at eye level, speaking softly yet firmly. "You're safe now. You're stronger than you think," he had said. Clara's heart had swelled with gratitude and a strange sense of empowerment. In that moment, she understood that courage isn't always about being fearless. It's about standing tall in the face of fear, about seeking support when it's needed, and about believing in the goodness of people even when the world feels unfair. Clara's thoughts turned to Officer Daniels. She felt a mix of anger and pity, anger for the way he had treated her, for the unnecessary intimidation and for the fear he had caused, but also pity, because she realized that his behavior came from insecurity and a desire to assert control. His authority had been challenged, and he had struggled to handle it with fairness and professionalism. Clara understood in a way that sometimes people misuse power when they are afraid of losing it. She didn't forgive him just yet, but she felt a sense of closure, knowing that he had stepped back, no longer able to intimidate her. As she rested on the bench, Clara noticed a few familiar faces from the park who had witnessed the confrontation. They smiled warmly at her, offering words of encouragement. "You were so brave," one person said softly. "No one deserves to be treated like that." Clara nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. The support of strangers, even in small gestures, made her feel seen and validated. It reminded her that even in moments of vulnerability, there are people who care, who notice, and who are willing to stand with others when it matters most. Her mind wandered to the events that had led to this day. She remembered how her accident years ago had changed her life, how she had learned to navigate the world in a wheelchair, and how every small victory had been hard-earned. Simple tasks like getting through a crowded street, reaching for groceries, or rolling along uneven sidewalks had been challenges she had faced with patience and determination. But nothing had prepared her for the sudden fear of being harassed in a place she considered safe. The experience had been a stark reminder that vulnerability can appear anywhere, even in spaces we trust. Yet through it all, Clara realized something important. She was not powerless. The fear she had felt was real, but it did not define her. The support she had received, the courage Cena had shown, and the silent empathy of those who had witnessed the scene had reinforced a crucial truth. Strength often comes in moments of connection, in the willingness of others to act and in the courage to accept that help. As the afternoon passed, Clara slowly wheeled herself along the familiar paths, taking in the beauty of the park. The flowers blooming near the benches, the children running freely, and the distant sound of a fountain all contributed to a sense of normalcy returning. She allowed herself to enjoy the simple pleasures she had come for in the first place. The warmth of the sun on her skin, the softness of the breeze, and the sense of being part of a community, even if only from a distance. Clara's mind also turned to the wider implications of what had happened. She realized that situations like hers are far more common than most people think. Many people, especially those with disabilities, face moments of unfair treatment, intimidation, or harassment. But she also understood that change is possible. When someone sees injustice and chooses to act, when voices are raised in support of fairness, the outcome can shift dramatically. Her experience was a personal lesson in the importance of standing up for what is right, and in the power of empathy and intervention. She thought about sharing her story, not to boast, but to inspire. To let others know that even in frightening situations, there are people willing to do the right thing. People who will stand with you when you are vulnerable. People who will speak up when the world seems unfair. Clara realized that her experience could serve as a reminder to others that kindness, courage, and empathy are not just abstract ideas. They are actions that have real consequences. As the day turned to evening, the park began to empty. The sunlight softened, casting long shadows across the paths. Clara remained seated for a while longer, reflecting on the events of the afternoon. She felt gratitude not just toward Cena, but also toward the quiet witnesses who had stayed nearby, whose presence added accountability and attention to the situation. Even without speaking, their silent support had mattered. She understood that human connection in all its forms can have a profound impact. Clara eventually wheeled herself back toward the park exit, her mind calmer and her spirit lighter. She had faced fear and intimidation, yet she had emerged stronger. The confrontation with Officer Daniels had been frightening, but it had also been transformative. She had learned about the strength of standing together, the importance of advocating for fairness, and the power of human kindness. As she left the park, Clara looked back one last time. The paths, the trees, the benches, they were all the same as before, but for her, nothing would ever be quite the same again. She felt a renewed sense of confidence, knowing that she had faced a difficult challenge and had been supported in a meaningful way. She also carried a quiet determination to continue living her life with courage, independence, and compassion. That evening, Clara returned to her small apartment, her body tired but her mind energized. She reflected on the lessons of the day, realizing that life often presents unexpected challenges but also unexpected allies. She understood that while fear and vulnerability are real, they do not have to define her experience. She felt empowered by the knowledge that courage and support exist in the world, and that standing up for oneself, and for others, can create meaningful change. As Clara prepared for bed that night, she felt a sense of peace. The park, which had once been just a place for fresh air and relaxation, now held deeper significance. It was a reminder that even in moments of fear, there is hope, that even when the world feels unfair, there are people willing to act, and that even in vulnerability, there is strength to be found, both within oneself and through the support of others. Clara closed her eyes and allowed herself to rest. She had faced a frightening situation, felt powerless at times, and yet emerged stronger and more aware of the goodness in people. The events of the day would stay with her forever, a vivid memory of fear, courage, and the profound impact of human kindness. She realized that the world, while imperfect, still held moments of beauty, justice, and hope, and she had experienced one of them firsthand. As sleep took over, Clara felt a sense of gratitude for the lessons learned and the courage shown by those who had stood with her. She knew that life would continue to present challenges, but she also knew that with strength, empathy, and support, she could face them. The experience had changed her, not just in the way she saw the park or the city around her, but in the way she saw herself. She had faced fear, embraced support, and emerged with a renewed sense of courage, a courage that would stay with her long after the park had returned to its peaceful rhythm.